All right, so welcome to Chat with Friendly Water for the World. This is week 3 of our weekly chat. It has been every Friday from noon until 1 Pacific Standard Time. I've got these scheduled out for the next several weeks, so if you have this link, you can always click this link and come back and chat with us again any Friday moving forward. We are Friendly Water for the World. I think almost everybody on the call is pretty familiar with us. If you're not, or you just need a refresher, our mission is to expand global access to low-cost clean water technologies and information about health and sanitation through knowledge sharing, training, applied research, community building, peacemaking, and efforts at sustainability. Our vision is of a healthy, self-sustaining, empowered world with peaceful communities, both here and abroad, sharing a knowledge with each other and with life and hope restored through clean water. It starts with clean water. So that's us. Today, we're going to have Ginny Stern join us. She is one of the original members of Friendly Water for the World. She was a board member from very early in the organization, was a volunteer, is a volunteer. She has been unbelievably helpful to me as this past year as I've kind of learned about the organization. She has an amazing memory of everything we've done and the different places we've been and the people we've helped in our projects. And she also has an incredible background that is unbelievably useful for the kind of work we do. She is a hydrologist by trade and has been working in safe and reliable water for many, many, many years. She has been abroad many times to Tanzania, several trips, and she's going to talk today about hydrophilanthropy and especially how that is working in East Africa, and also how Friendly Water for the World interacts and intersects with that. So I'm going to switch over to Jenny in just a second here once I get the new screen shared. All right, let's see. And there it is. Okay. And Jenny, I'm going to find you. I'm going to unmute you, Jenny. So you should be on now. And I'm going to share your presentation.
Will and I were joking earlier that he's going to control the slides. And so I said, well, when I want to change the slide, I just go beep, right? And we both laughed and realized that not everybody comes from the film strips days where you had the little beep and you had to move the film strip. So I'll just say change the slide.
All right, you're on.
Can you all hear me okay? The volume's all right? I'm assuming if it isn't, you'll let Will know and I'll change that. So there you go. So the topic is hydrophilanthropy and climate change and the evolving face of water charity in Tanzania. It's a personal reflection because I've been lucky enough to be in Tanzania and working with both Friendly Water for the World and also another NGO, next slide, that brought me to Tanzania in the first place. So the basics are, what's hydrophilanthropy? And it's basically charitable initiatives that advance sustainability of clean water for the world. It was developed as a term by David Kremer from the University of Las Vegas in the 2000s. And the reason was because there was an unfortunate history of water projects, water charity projects being done in the developing world that looked great on paper, might have even looked great when they got on the ground in the beginning, and failed miserably after a few years, whether it was wells that failed 5 years in or water systems that couldn't be managed locally. And so as hydrologists and people who work in the water business, there was a real push to say, let's be clear, what is efficient, effective, and sustainable at a local level? Because otherwise we might not want to be putting our money and our resources there. It's a false promise and a hollow gift to the world we're working with. So that's the hydrophilanthropy piece. Friendly Water for the World, as you've heard, is a Washington-based nonprofit, and we started in 2010, and I was lucky enough to be part of the first group. I was a board member early on, and the goal was at that time safe and reliable water, and our tool at that time were BioSand filters. That was the cheap available technology that we started with, and you'll see we've been on a journey, and we're learning that safe and reliable water has a lot of components. And for those of you Department of Health people, you know the term safe and reliable. That's been the watchword for public water in the state of Washington since I came to work there. And that brings me to the last point. Who am I? I am a hydrogeologist. I'm licensed, but I retired from the Department of Health a few years ago. And the time I was there, it was drinking water. Before that, I worked on wildland waters, both surface and groundwater. As an early Friendly for the World water supporter and a volunteer, I have been involved with Friendly Water and its work, and I've watched it change and grow over the years. And I'm also a Lucky Olympia resident with a lot of history with Tanzania. I first went to Tanzania in 2005 with another Olympia nonprofit that did teaching projects. And it was in 2017 when I retired that I was able to go back on another 3-month trip to Tanzania and meld the time I was there for the teaching project with a new project that Friendly Water was starting in central Tanzania with the Maasai. And so that kind of was my first opportunity to meld Friendly Water for the World with my experiences in Tanzania. But Friendly Water for the World had been in Tanzania starting in 2013. So it's been, and so I'll take you a little bit on that journey. So the next slide, please. Next slide. So first of all, Tanzania is really big and diverse. So there's 2 maps here. One of them is the map of Tanzania showing you some of its partners. Tanzania is on the east coast of Africa on the Indian Ocean. To the north is Kenya and Uganda. To the west is Congo, and to the Burundi, Rwanda, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Mozambique, and Malawi. It's big. It's the size of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Nevada combined. So for our Northwest centric, it's big. And interestingly enough, it shares the same kind of diversity that Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Nevada share. It has mountains, glacier mountains, volcanoes, lakes, rivers, streams, deserts, forests, rainforests, savannas. It has all of it. The difference is it's 3 degrees south of the equator, and we're 48 degrees north of the equator. Tanzania was originally 2 countries, Tanganyika and Zanzibar. And in the 50s, they formed a coalition, became the country of Tanzania. So it's a relatively young country. In the world of East African culture, it's reasonably peaceful. It's incredibly poor. The mix of population is about equal parts Muslim and Christian, and what fills in the difference is other, just a mix of things. The size of Tanzania is 365,750 square miles. The population is 34.8 million. The GDP of Tanzania is $930 a year. That's significantly different than ours. It's a very poor country in terms of world standard. It relies extensively on subsistence agriculture. People get fed in Tanzania because the people in Tanzania grow food. They grow a lot of the food that they need themselves. The life expectancy in Tanzania is 65 years. On the issue of climate change, which we're going to talk more about, their CO2 emissions are 20.26 tons per person per decade per annum. In the United States, it's 15.7. So a small contributor on the international scale for carbon dioxide global warming challenges. But I think as you'll see as we talk about it, significant impacts. 3 of the top 10 largest freshwater lakes exist in and around Tanzania. They're part of the borders. To the north is Lake Victoria, the big lake in the northern portion of the country. Along the western edge, as you come down, is Lake Tanganyika. And down at the bottom, on the Malawi border, is Lake Nyasa or Lake Malawi, depending upon who you're talking to at the time. These are, again, 3 of the top 10 largest freshwater lakes in the world. So they have that on the east coast. They have islands, freshwater, saltwater fisheries, and some large river deltas that feed out to the west. The map on the right-hand side is just kind of give the United States folks a little sense of the geography. If you overlaid Tanzania over the eastern seaboard, the city of Mwanza, the second largest city in Tanzania, would be Green Bay at the northern portion, and Washington, D.C. would be where Dar es Salaam is. So that's how long it takes to get from from the first largest city to the second largest city. You can fly there, but it's not fast. You have to go through a bunch of different ways to get from point A to point B. Travel and transportation in Tanzania is a challenge, especially from perspective from our Western, but it adds time and costs and operational constraints to many of the projects that we and our partners do there. Next slide. This is just a real quick one to show the climate that as it exists. The blue is rainforest and savanna. It's a savanna, wet savanna. But you'll notice in the middle, there's a dry savanna. Think steplands. And I tell people think New Mexico without the Rio Grande and a bunch of cows. So it's dry, it's barren, it's rural. Tanzania has 3 significantly large cities, some other ones, and a lot of empty space with small rural developments and not a big infrastructure between them. In the southern part of the state, in the southwestern corner where it's green, that's the temperate forests, a little bit moving up. I was working down in that area into about 4,000 to 6,000 feet elevation, and they grow tea and things down there. So it's a very diverse country. In the blue dot up at the north around the lake, and you also have Mount Kilimanjaro that is in the northeastern portion of the country. So pretty diverse. You can go to the next slide. And this is to show you a little bit more about the diversity. And as I walk you around some of the pictures, I want you to look at the map for a minute and see the network of roads across that. That's about it. Okay, so getting from that's just not a high level map. That's pretty much the major roadways. There are other roads, but they have their own challenges. So there's a very limited network of infrastructure that runs through this country. So starting at the upper left-hand portion of this guide, that's a shoreline of Lake Victoria from Mwanza. And the rolling hills as we move across the top are some of the forest and savanna lands of the northern portion of Tanzania around Lake Victoria. But it moves very quickly from green and lush into drier steppelands. The picture on the right-hand top side is of the Serengeti. It is a rich, vast savanna land that in the wet season is lush and homes to migrating herds of all kinds of animals. It's the part that a lot of Westerners think about, along with the picture below, which is itself Mount Kilimanjaro. But in the central portion of the state, that's the next picture. That's the Maasai lands. That's what the central portion of the country lives. Just like in Washington, we have mountain ranges and we have a wet side and a dry side. Same thing happens in Tanzania. To the picture there that's sitting below Mount Kilimanjaro, that's the dry side. And if you crossed over the mountain range, you'd be in the Serengeti National Park, which looks much like the picture of the Serengeti. It's rich, it's a river basin full of wildlife. The picture at the bottom is of aerial view of Dar es Salaam, the largest city in Tanzania. It's an international port. And it also is the gateway to the Zanzibaran Islands. Then as you come across, the bottom picture is the top of Lake Nyasa down at the very bottom of the map. That's the countryside where I work. Those are the Livingston Mountains that you see on the horizon. And in those areas, you'll see upland forests, tea plantations, small shareholder crops growing bananas and tea, a lot of subsistence farming in that way, fishing, of course, in the lakes all along Tanzania. And the pictures that come up the left-hand side are, again, some of the lands that you might find as you move inland and north to Mbeya and some of the central savanna lands that you see. They have a rainy season and a dry season. And in the rainy season and in the rainy season, they're quite productive lands. And in the dry season, just like we have here, we don't get much rain in the summer. In their dry season, it's dry until the rains come again in the fall. So availability of water impacts not only lifestyle choices, the way people live and work, but it also impacts the available resources that those communities have. Let's go to the next picture. So, as I said, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Nevada have a lot in common with Tanzania. And these, surprisingly, if I took the picture of Tanzania off and put a picture of Washington State, these would be the same picture, the same criteria that we would see for expected physical changes as a result of climate change.
Hello.
Hello. We see a couple of changes of temperature. 2 to 4 degrees. We see changes in rainfall intensity. You might not see a change in the overall rainfall pattern, in the overall rainfall amount that might come, precipitation that falls, but when and how it comes is changing as a result of climate. Shifts in historical hydro periods and norms, increased flooding and increased drought, sea level rise on the coasts, and continued glacial retreat. And as most of you who know me from the Department of Health, you heard me tell this story about Washington State. And that's the expected climate change impacts. Next one. Next slide, please. The difference between Tanzania and Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Nevada, as I said before, it's 3 degrees south of the equator. And we're 48 degrees north. And the things that I just described aren't what's going to happen, they are happening. So they're already seeing shifts in the location and the quality of agricultural and pasture and forest lands. As hydro patterns, weather patterns change, the ability to grow traditional crops on the same ground may not work the same as it did before. A lot of subsistence agriculture in Tanzania relies on corn. Well, corn is a water hog in terms of its needs for water. And as a result, if periods of wet and dry change, the ability to get productive corn product on some of the marginal lands goes down, and people may not be able to do what they used to do on that. Or there's pressure to cut forests to get charcoal, to do other things. So there's been some of the impacts. Freshwater systems are also changing. They're getting changes in temperature, and they're getting changes in water quality because of changes in temperature and changes in water levels. And that can lead to significant terrestrial and aquatic habitat loss. There's been increases in parasites and pests, and that leads to subsequent disease. And there's been areas where significantly reduced groundwater recharge. Coastal inundation in some areas and seawater intrusion are challenges as well. It's an incredibly diverse land, so what's going on around Lake Victoria isn't necessarily what's happening down in the southern part near Lake Malawi. In fact, sea levels dropped in some areas and gone up in others. So indirect impacts, it's okay, that's fine. Go to the next slide, please. So the indirect impacts, so do a little mental calculation in your head. If we change when the water's where it is and how much is there when it's there, and that impacts what can grow on the land, it has the potential to dramatically change traditional agricultural practices in communities that are subsistence based. Whether it's the Maasai, and the rainy season used to be 9 months long, and it now spreads into 10, or it was 7 and it's now 9. Where do you go for graze for your cows? You have to wander farther away from your traditional base to go find food for your cows to eat. You may have to travel farther every day to get water. And the water that you get isn't just for yourself to drink, it's for your animals, whether they're goats or chickens or cows. In addition, as water availability changes on the landscape, so does the nature of what grows on the landscape. And so you may see changes in the quality of of what's growing that can be used. All of this increases food, what we would call food insecurity. The traditional production methods that sustain in some areas, multiple generations are at risk because those old patterns aren't providing the same robust protection that they had before. We've seen the expansion of malaria and dengue zones. Where I was working in Southwest Tanzania, when I first started showing up in Tukuyu, there might be malaria in Tukuyu, but when I went up to the school where I was teaching, which was at 5,400 feet, you never saw malaria. You didn't use nets, you didn't need them. When I was there in 2018, everybody was using nets. So as the temperature changes, the parasites, the bugs, and the pests can move with the changes in the weather, and they may not be the natural protections that may have existed in some areas against certain kinds of pests and disease fall away. Deforestation is a huge issue in some parts of the landscape where the pressure for making more money or making a sustainable living may revolve around clearing more land, cutting down more trees, feeding a population that grows in some areas. You use charcoal. Charcoal requires the harvesting of trees, whether it's to open up more agricultural areas through a slash and burn kind of land clearing, or whether it's for harvesting wood for charcoal, or the conversion of landscapes from traditional forests to small share crops like tea. They all have impacts on the natural forested watershed. There's threatened coastal infrastructure as sea level rises or lowers, depending upon what's going on. Everything from piers and docks to pipes and plumbing get impacted. There's been an increase in forests and savanna fires from the changes from the cycles of drought and flooding. And overall, we have reduced access to clean water, losses of traditional agriculture, as I mentioned, increases in waterborne and parasitic diseases. Populations, because of that, populations move from rural lands, whether they were bushmen who were hunters and gatherers, or whether they were small subsistence farmers, they may move into the cities because they can't support themselves in their traditional settings. And unfortunately, Tanzania doesn't have a diverse industrial base to absorb a whole lot of basically unskilled migrants coming into an urban environment. Now that's just the climate population migration. As you remember that map, there are countries all around Tanzania that are not dealing with the relative peace that Tanzania can experience. And so there are political and cultural refugees who come into the city as well, especially along the borders around the lakes. And that also adds to a significant pressure in the cities with populations who are food insecure, may not have the best housing, and have the sources of disease and may be prone to disease and other kinds of threats to their safety. We've seen increases in infant and HIV/AIDS related mortality. And one of the biggest ones is a loss of productivity and educational opportunities for women and children. Next page. Next one. Will? Thank you. And as I mentioned before, in Tanzania, the impacts of climate change are not hypothetical or projected. Where we talk about climate impacts and we talk to a Western audience about the things that you can expect to see with 2 degrees temperature change, it's happening now in Tanzania. The things that we've described as indirect impacts are things that the Tanzanian government and the local municipalities and the districts have been seeing and dealing with. It's a local issue. It's happening now, and it impacts the country's most vulnerable populations: the children, orphans, widows, families with HIV/AIDS, people with albinism, refugees, and other at-risk transient populations, low-income communities, both rural and urban. Interestingly enough, the Tanzanian government should deserve great kudos because early in their climate strategy, which they've developed, a climate action strategy, they've identified that climate change is a gender equity issue. That solutions for climate change that the government and that the communities take on need to be thinking about how it impacts gender because they are often the largest part of these at-risk populations that we've described. Interestingly also is safe and sustainable access to clean water is often a common metric used by governments to look at whether the risk of and the preparedness for climate adaptation and climate sustainability. And it goes back to this idea of hydrophilanthropy. Next slide, please. So back to a review of hydrophilanthropy. This really is coming together here. It's charitable initiatives that advance sustainability of clean water in the world. And attributes of hydrophilanthropy from the perspective of the hydro geeks in the world are local partnerships, working at a local level with local entities, community involvement. There has to be a commitment by people on the ground in the communities to see success. There's an educational component, and it has to involve simple local technology, monitoring and evaluation. The idea is whatever fixes that we want to provide as aid should be something that can be adapted, managed, and owned locally, and that is durable, efficient, and sustainable by the local people. It doesn't require a foreigner to come in and maintain it. The technology and the knowledge base, once it's established, is owned and managed locally. And those programs have the highest rate of success in the view of people who look at charitable activities. You don't put in wells that break 5 years later. You may invest in pumps that can be managed locally. You look at working with local groups. So next slide, please. Well, Friendly Water for the World, shifting gears slightly, has two partners that we work with extensively in Tanzania. These are two Tanzanian nonprofits. So they are registered with the Tanzanian government and existed before Friendly Water for the World ever came into their view, existed for purposes to develop communities. One of them is the Hope Revival Children's Organization, and it's located in the most northern portion of Lake Victoria and Tanzania in the community of Mwanza. Relatively agricultural and fishing-based community. The second is CLAO, Community Life Amelioration Organization. I didn't make up the names. Thank goodness they have easy acronyms. That's located in Tanzania's second city, Mwanza. And both of these groups initially started to address local community needs of their at-risk populations, whether it is women and widows with HIV in one area, or children or non-traditional students who are in an urban environment trying to get an education and they are coming back to school. These were two groups that we started working with because they saw a value for their customers or their clients of clean water, and the filters became a tool. In the process of these groups using and working with Friendly Water, they also became a part of their mission. They became a way that they could continue to do their work. At the time I made the slide, there were Friendly Water projects all around the Lake Victoria area, down into the central area, down to Arusha. But since then, they've moved to projects down in Dar es Salaam, all the way across the state. So these two groups have reached out and partnered with a host of other local community groups and built community groups to work on specifically the issues of access to clean and safe, reliable water and the associated challenges that go with building a community around these resources. Next slide. So remember I said that Friendly Water started as a water deal. We did filters. When David first came to me and asked me to participate, I said, oh, I know about putting in wells. And David said, we don't do wells, we do filters. And he proceeded to tell me about it. This is public water in many places in Tanzania. Whether in public just means many people use it. Under the World Health Organization, that central picture, the top central picture where the water's coming out of a standpipe, that would be a public water supply, a developed public water supply. And it doesn't matter what color or quality the water that comes out the pipe or how reliably it comes out of the pipe, it's considered a public supply. And you can see that it doesn't even come close to the things we take for granted as public water. Next slide. But safe water is only part of the issue. Getting it and getting it home is the other part. So you're looking at the water delivery, public water delivery system of Tanzania for much of Tanzania, not just in rural areas, but in many of the outlying urban areas, under the lesser developed portions of urban corridors. And one of the things you'll notice is that it relies heavily on children and women. So the one down at the bottom, there's no women or children in the picture. Those are burros, those are donkeys, and girls are loading them up with 5-gallon jerry cans to trek miles to get water and then trek miles to get home. And the water that they're bringing is for everything. It's not just for drinking water. It's for washing their clothes. It's for feeding their animals. It's for all the things they need to do. And when they get it home after that much effort, it may not be clean enough. It may cause them illness. In fact, it probably does. Next picture. So what does that mean for friendly water and its work? Next. That's a picture of our BioSand filters if you haven't seen them before. Well, as I said, it's kind of a natural fit between hydrophilanthropy and friendly water. We are, as a nonprofit, our goal was to provide locally sustainable access to clean water technology, sanitation, and education. They're a natural fit, but when you put them on the ground, what does it mean? And we started with the simple. We started with BioSand filters. And I like to say that BioSand filters are kind of the original DIY hack of clean water. They're based on a simple technology. And I'll show you a few pictures of what that looks like, but that's how we started. We started with the clean part. We weren't gonna be doing wells, we weren't gonna be doing other stuff, but we learned that we could give a BioSand filter that sits in someone's house that can make dirty water into safe and clean water, but they have to have the water. They might have to walk miles to get it. Well, what if they had a way to store water closer? Collect rainwater, do things that would minimize the amount of time they have to go, and use that in combination with a clean water technology. And as we went into water storage and catchment, we realized there was another piece. I can't make wet water as a hydrogeologist, but I can teach people how to be smarter about the water that they do use, so that what they use more efficiently and more consistently, so that what they have lasts longer and is there when they need it for the critical uses. So let's start the next slide. This is about the BioSand filters. So BioSand filters are, as I said, one of the original DIY hacks. You build them yourself. You literally build them out of sand and clay and cement, and it's manually intensive. Friendly Water provides training and equipment that can be reused. And once up and running, a team can build a BioSand filter in a mold every day. And a BioSand filter can last for years. It doesn't take great skill to run it once the basic knowledge is there, and it provides a high level of sanitation. It's based on the same technology that we use for most of our wastewater treatment plants, which is a slow sand intermittent slow sand filter. It's just been scaled to something that can fit in a house. Next slide. These are the training in the Maasai lands, and it's very labor intensive. You get down, you get dirty, you play with cement, you wash sand and gravel till it's clean. But it's an accessible technology that people can learn. And when we go into a community to teach them, we'll bring together a group of 20 to 40 people, run them through both the in-book, what is it about sanitation and clean water that the filter does that can materially change the quality of their life. And then we actually do hands-on. And in a 5-day training, they might build 16 to 17 filters. The goal being that when the training is done, we not only have filters that can show people what they do, but we have a team of people and the resources needed to make more, and they can build and sell them and continue the process so they can control the access to the technology as it goes forward. Next slide. And it can be done by anybody, but it takes effort and it's not easy work. But we found that as we teach, we're as likely to teach women as we are to teach men, and we're as likely to teach young people as we are to teach older. If the technology is available, and it's usable, and it's accessible. Next one. A filter it takes about $25 to $30 to make, not counting labor. So it's affordable too. People can afford to buy their filters. And you'll find them in all kinds of quality. I don't think that's a Tanzanian picture on the top with the pretty filters, but we have teams that have started needing filters, and then they become builders of filters. And through that, they become the ability to sell, create resources that they and their community can use. We've had quite a bit of success with people of albinism in Tanzania, who are quite often a significantly disadvantaged and a minority and at risk. By providing them with filters and the technology to build filters, they become the ability to generate a revenue stream that can help make other community improvements. Next slide. So we talked about rainwater because we found early on, and it was in Tanzania, we had people who were building filters, but still had to walk miles to get water to pour in the filters. And the question was, what can we do to improve that? So we worked with some local technology that we had people here in expertise. We took it over to East Africa, not just Tanzania, started in Rwanda, teaching the technology of small scale rainwater catchments and cisterns. Next slide. Remember, there's a rainy season in Tanzania, and in the rainy season, a lot of water falls, and it falls down the roofs and runs off and floods things. And if they could catch it, they could use it later. And so our rainwater and catchment training is a series of workshops where we were training trainers, we were training builders so that they could then go out. The catchments are scaled for use either in homes, schools, orphanages, and community centers. They use local material, and they dramatically improve sanitation and security. If I don't have to go in the bush miles and hours a day to get water, I can be home taking care of my family, and I can be safe. And it supports local enterprise and development by building and installation teams. Next slide. And they come in all sizes, and they are done by all. We worked with, as I said, we were working with families from people with albinism in one group, and in another part of Tanzania, we were working with teachers, and they were primarily women. So the technology is not limited to one gender or one type of person, and they all get done, and then they can provide that service to other people, and it becomes a revenue source that they can then use to meet their own needs. So we don't build or buy water cisterns for people. We train local teams to build and sell their own so that they become the controlling factor of the technology. Next slide. So we talked about other water smart technologies, and there's 4 of them that I'm going to talk about very briefly, because you're going to hear more in the weeks to come from some of our experts who work exclusively on these. They can tell you way more about this. So I'm just going to touch on them briefly as we go forward. And they include MicroFlush latrines, compressed earth bricks, think waterless bricks, micro rocket stoves, and permagardens. And so can you go to the next slide, please? This is a traditional latrine in the central portion of Tanzania. That's if they have one. Where I worked in southern Tanzania, most of the households just had a dug hole out in the back if they had that. At the school I went to, as I was teaching at, the kids would go out into the bush to go during the middle of the day. Why? Because the pit toilets that were there are generally not maintained. They're terrible, they stink, they smell. And one of the biggest challenges with a pit toilet is the hole fills up. And if you're in the woods like we are, and we might run into a latrine and the hole fills up, you fill the hole in, you dig another hole, you move the box, and it's fine. But if you live on a compound or in a community, you can't keep moving the box. So one of the challenges for toilets and sanitation is that you have to have a technology that can be maintained in time and space that doesn't pose an undue burden on the community to do it, or they'll stop using it, just like they did where I was in southern Tanzania. Next one. So there's a technology. It's a wonderful technology, and it's called MicroFlush Toilet composting latrines. Think if a toilet crossed with a septic tank and you could catch the organic material, that's the grandchild that comes out as a MicroFlush composting latrine. Next. Looks a lot better. This is on the same compound where that other one lived. Next one. And they can come in a variety of shapes and sizes, and they're scaled for home, school, community center, and orphanage uses. Think about it. We're dealing in communities that were getting their water, many of them were getting their water out of a nearby river or stream. You bring in a BioSand filter and the quality of their health goes up just from the reduction of pathogens in the water. They haven't necessarily seen the value or the use of a toilet, other than if they're in areas where it's not safe to go out in the woods to go to the bathroom. So coming up with a technology that lets them build a reusable, sustainable toilet that gives them the security and the efficiency that doesn't require a lot of water to use, you're giving them another piece of technology that adds materially to the quality and the health of their family life and their community life. So this is another technology that is relatively easy to be done. It requires local labor and materials. It's easy to maintain, and it's water efficient. It doesn't use very much water, gray water, and that gray water can be used. And the core piece of this is that there is a layer in a collection box, like a small septic tank, that the top catches the organic material on a layer of organic material like banana leaves and reeds and things like that. And the liquid travels down and gets percolated out into the subsurface. Over time, they can open up that pit and pull that organic material out, and it is compost that can be used locally on gardens. So like the water storage tanks, the technology becomes a local enterprise. I can build toilets. I've got a team that can build toilets for schools and for clinics or for orphanages, and it can become a fundraising or a mechanism to generate both labor, work, and revenue. Next one. So this is what I consider one of the biggest game changers on the table, and that is interlocking compressed bricks. So think a brick like a cement paver brick that's certain size that has crenulations along the outside, and they interlock together so that if I put one brick next to another on top of it or next to it, they'll kind of lock together. Well, in many parts of the rural world, when you build a brick, there's two major ways you can build a brick. You can mix mud, straw, and sand together and clay and cut it into shapes and let it sit out and sun dry. And when that's done, when it's dry sufficiently, you use it as a building material and you stack them on top of each other. And it's relatively cheap and it's easy. It does require a fair amount of water. And the biggest disadvantage to them is that those bricks will wear away in a period of time because we're in a rainy climate. And as it goes on over time, the bricks literally degrade and the roof comes down to the floor. That's a challenge in a culture that has a significant rainy season. The alternative to that is you can make baked bricks, where you can take that same raw material, pile the bricks up into a kiln kind of shape, put charcoal inside, fire it for a period of time, and bake the bricks from the inside out. And those baked bricks are significantly harder. They'll last for many more years, just like baked bricks here. They're harder, they last longer, they have a resiliency. They just require the same amount of water to get started and charcoal and time to burn and turn them into a baked brick. What if you could jump past that hoop and build a brick that doesn't require a significant amount of water, that can be made just as fast as in the same amount of time that a traditional brick can be made without having to do it, and it's made with the same materials. So if I have a brick that I can make out of dirt, sand, and a bag of cement, dry, mix it together with a small amount of water, and use a compressing machine, a machine that uses physical compression to push down on the brick form and make a brick, put that out and let it cure chemically for 10 days, same amount of time it takes to dry a brick in the sun. I now have a brick that's as fast and as easy to make, actually faster to make, easier to make, that's weather resistant. That's as strong as a baked brick. And I've done it with less than the amount of water, with significantly less. These, the work that we were seeing in Uganda, and at the question, somebody can help me out if I got this wrong, but we were making with a load of sand and dirt and 5 gallons of water, they could make the better part of 300 bricks in a day, 4 people. The bricks are different sizes, they can be modeled, and the machine is portable. And it's no charcoal required. And I have personal experience with the challenges of brick making. Where I was working in southern Tanzania, there were people up the hill who decided they needed bricks for houses they were going to make, and so they hacked into our water line to get water to make bricks. And so a school of 600 was without water for 3 weeks until we figured out where all the leaks were. So if there's a technology that lets them build bricks that doesn't require a lot of water, that on top of it, because the bricks are interlocking, they don't require much in the way of mortar to hold them together, that building in the bottom has been built with these kinds of bricks. You save money all the way around, you reduce the time, and you have permanent structures that can sustain a community. It's also a revenue source. Next. Mini stoves. So cooking in a lot of Tanzania is done over a charcoal brazier. And if there's a cooking house that you might cook in, many women might work together in a very charcoaly, smoky environment because it's open charcoal over a brazier with their kids on their back, and they're cooking. It takes charcoal. Charcoal has to be bought, it has to be made, and it is not the most efficient. And the women are there with their children in the smoke most of the time. Well, there's a simple technology to make an efficient, small, portable stove called rocket stove that can burn almost anything without having to require charcoal and without requiring the same kind of effort to use. And it's smokeless because it's so much more efficient. And so it's been built inside of structures, and it's been built in smaller and outdoor spaces. And we're literally talking about a stove that's made out of clay and dirt in a bucket with the pipes to make the oven. And you can burn twigs to dung, and it's very efficient. And we've been teaching people how to use that because, again, it's a significant improvement to health, but it also reduces the amount of charcoal, and they can burn much more and more efficiently than a traditional brazier would. Next one. And lastly, as I said, there have been a lot of changes in the landscape, and traditional crops and traditional growing methods, which might have been flood irrigation for tomatoes or for corn, may not be an option any longer if the water supply isn't where and when you want it. So one of the things that we're being introduced with our partners by Mr. Jensen and his team is how to use permagarden technology for small scale, appropriate agriculture that lets many of our partners be much more productive on the land they do have access to in a much more water efficient way. And it's definitely scaled the household size. Some of the things that come out of it are the ability to grow things in ways they wouldn't have thought about. When I was in Uganda, we were at one of their demonstration farms where the Friendly Water partners there were showing smarter ways to use permagardening as a way to save water, use water, but grow more things on the same piece of ground than they could before. And one of the things they were doing, which wasn't about planting, but their goats, which would normally just wander around, at night were put up in a pen with the chicken wire on the bottom. Because guess what happened when the goats pooped? It went down, and somebody could gather the goat poop and use it for fertilizer. Simple, conscious choices about planting and managing the space they have more efficiently gives them much more resources to work with. And so we started partnering in 2018 with the permagarden people in a few places, and it's been highly vaunted. People want it. It's a technology that is letting them think not only about how to change how they grow things, but also what they might grow, because they have access to things that are much more drought tolerant and water saving, so they may be more self-sufficient and reliant as they move into the future. So the next slide, and this will probably be your event. So the reality for hydrophilanthropy and water, friendly water for the world, we have a natural mix. And the critical pieces is it relies on local and community group partners, and it relies on our partnership with the Tanzanian NGOs. And we can provide technology and skill sets and tools to get people started. And together they end up with this goal of safe, accessible, sustainable drinking water. It's not just one thing. And the critical part of sustainability here is as we move into this time of uncertainty with climate change and its impact on the populations of Tanzania. So it's a story of adaptation and progress and hope, both of our partners in Tanzania and as an organization. When we started, we were only going to do filters. And now Friendly Water for the World, because of our partners' needs, demands, and their experiences, we have learned that to have safe water often requires us to work in areas we never thought we would in the first place. So with that, next slide. I'll take questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Ginny. That was great. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. All right. So the grid should be up for everybody. I'm going to unmute everybody. You're welcome to mute yourself if you don't want to, but everybody can now speak. And are there questions for Ginny? Who has a question for Ginny?
Jen, I had one. What is a perma garden? I'm not familiar with that term.
Is Peter still on the call?
I believe Peter is, yeah, Peter's still on the call. Peter's actually going to be coming next week to tell us everything there is to know about permagardens. But if Peter, if you want to just give a quick highlight view for the answer for that question.
Sure, I can. Can you all hear me right now?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Ginny, that was a great overview of all the things that Friendly Water does, and I'm happy that you gave a little shout out to permagardens.
Exactly.
To answer your question about what they are, permagarden literally means permanent garden. It's a combination of the technologies or the philosophies, if you will, of permaculture and bio-intensive gardening. But we make it simpler and easier to understand by following a process, a 5-step process that I call terra firma. And terra firma means solid earth, quite literally, and it's about saving, using, and controlling your water, turning runoff that used to destroy into subsoil moisture recharge. And that becomes, allows people in a small space to be able to grow more food, 400% more per square meter, actually, over the entire year, not just the growing season, but the rainy season, but also the season that follows the rainy season, the dry, and then the very dry season. So we extend the value of the rain by putting it into holes, cisterns in the soil, not like bricks and mortar cisterns, but actually the soil as cistern. So it's about making healthy soil and then using bio-intensive planting practices, triangular spacing, intercropping, grain, legume, vegetables, seasonally appropriate, but by putting the water into the ground and holding it in the soil itself through making sure the soil has air, water, and carbon in the soil, basic soil health principles that people can do, because we only use the organic material that people already have. We import nothing at all. And that's a very important rule that I follow. I'll go into this next week as well. It's called the rule of close, which means every single thing we do is close, local, organic, small, and easy. And that's a behavior change strategy, which I developed 15 years ago when I was working with as a Peace Corps trainer across the world. I've done these permagarden trainings for about 2 decades with a number of NGOs and also as well as the Peace Corps. And now I'm happy to provide this training on occasion to Friendly Water groups in Rwanda, Uganda, Tanzania. And we'll talk much more about that next week. I look forward to hearing from you. And if in advance, if anybody would like to watch a few videos about what permagardens are around the world, Terra Firma International is the YouTube channel. and as well as the website is thisisterrafirma.com. So you could go on either that website, thisisterrafirma.com, or Terra Firma International YouTube. And I've got about 60 to 75 short 3 to 5 minute videos from around the world that would explain more about the permagarden process and why we do it and how it's saving water and saving lives and providing nutrition security through the entire year, not just when the rainy season crop comes off and goes to market, but it's about kitchen focused nutrition. And the thing about nutrition, my last comment is child nutrition, those pesky kids need to eat every single day.
Exactly.
So it's not about, can you grow a lot of crop for the market? That's wonderful. Agriculture, it's wonderful. But can you grow enough and harvest every single day to provide a nutritious, balanced meal to your 5 to 7 children and the rest of your family in the home? And that's what a permagarden is all about. It's about nutrition security. And we get there by being climate smart. So thank you. I'll have a lot more to talk about next week. I hope you have
Glad
enjoyed
we
it.
can set you up for next week.
Yeah, that's a good teaser.
Mm-hmm. That's
Does
very
anybody-
interesting.
Does anybody else have questions for Ginny about the hydrophilanthropy or Tanzania?
Hi,
Carol?
this is Carolyn Cox.
Hi.
Great to see you, Jenny. I've missed you a lot. And I've been fascinated to watch how this is more from the single sand filters to the things that you're doing now. I guess this is sort of a philosophical question. Is your greatest takeaway from all this experience that you've had with this and what you see looking forward?
That's a really good question. And I think for me, and I'm watching it, and I've stepped off the board in the last year because of family issues, but watching the new board members and watching Friendly Water evolve as it has, I think the most important lesson is the people we work with are our partners. They're not recipients, they're our equal partners in this, because ultimately they have to apply this and make a difference in their life. And being able to come to the table and work with teams like CLAO and HRCO and other community groups is huge, because they've brought us as much information as we give back in terms of how to do it right, how to do it on the ground, what their needs are, learning to hear from them what they need. And considering the fact that we work with so many at-risk groups, being able to bring in something like permagardening, which is not just about being able to plant stuff, but have stuff, all nutritional stuff all year, directly changes, just as clean water does, the quality of life of the people we work with. So it's those little changes and seeing them adapted locally. That's been the most meaningful for me.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Bob Cairns. I was wondering if the slides were going to be posted on your website.
Bob, I can make them available to you directly. The video itself will be posted on YouTube, so you can always go back and rewatch this whole video or just watch the slides part of the video if you like. But I can also make the slides available to you directly.
Okay, that'd be great. There's some other people that I'd like to show the slides to.
Yeah, fantastic. I'll make sure you get those. Anybody else with a question for Ginny? Yes, Anne?
Yeah, I'm wondering, I work with an organization or someone who runs an.
I've lost the tail end of this.
Sorry?
I only heard part of what you said. You worked for an
I said
organization.
I work with someone who runs an organization in the coastal villages of Kenya.
Mhm.
I'd be curious if you're working there at all, if there's any place we could show them what you're doing.
I'll take the first shot, but I'll pass it back to Will and David. So Friendly Water has partners in Kenya. I don't know recently how much we've been doing along the coast, but certainly we've had we started in Kenya. A lot of our work started there. So there are active filter building programs. My understanding is a lot of the permaculture work started in Kenya and with David, and we've taken advantage in Tanzania. Tanzania didn't join the herd of friendly water projects until 2013, and we started first in Kenya and then expanded to Uganda and other places from there. So I think there probably are, and I would direct that question back to Friendly Water. Will can take it to Kurt and the rest of the management team to see who we might have and who we might be able to get in contact with local community groups there.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, our programs manager is based in Kenya, Eric Lajodi, and we have been having recent conversations about projects there. So I can connect with you and figure out who might be the right people or the right communities to connect.
Perfect, thank you.
Anybody else?
Oh,
Yes, Elizabeth.
Hi, Ginny. Elizabeth from Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Hello.
You mentioned very briefly some of the impact of conflict and violence in the surrounding countries. And I'm wondering whether within Tanzania, you're finding that where the techniques get applied, they're actually reducing potential community conflicts, and with a big hope that might expand a bit more internationally.
Well, we have projects in Tanzania. I haven't seen that impact, but I haven't seen the need in the same way. But we have teams working in both Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda, and the Democratic Congo, which, and I have to be honest, in the communities where we bring this technology, there's stability that comes with it, but they are often in the middle, as in Congo, in war zones. So by itself, it doesn't bring it, but I think anything that brings stability to a community, especially empowering those who might be at risk to begin with, whether they are the pygmies we work with in Congo or widows and orphans and that are in refugee camps, we're giving them the power to build and make money and sell things. It gives them some stability. Tanzania has been blessed, even though it doesn't have a lot of money. It has a fairly mixed and ecumenical population that has gotten along amazingly well since their formation, and they are often part of the peacekeeping forces that are in their neighboring countries. And
Elizabeth, I want to add to that answer. We have been working in refugee camps in Tanzania. I think there are 4 groups within refugee camps where we have been working. We're also working with people of albinism who experience tremendous violence when they go out of their communities to gather water. One of the things that's been important about our work is made it possible for them, first of all, to become valued members of their community, but second, to begin to end the long walk of women. The rates of rape among women with albinism are astronomical. In the other countries, some of our work has been the outgrowth of other Quaker work around trauma healing and dealing with conflict. Many of those groups, of course, have 5-day workshops, wonderful workshops on peacemaking and trauma healing and whatever. But then the question is, what do they do when they go home? And what we have done since our inception, since our first program in Burundi in 2010, is basically said, okay, now you know how to make peace, but what are you going to do with your time? How can you make this peacekeeping operation part of something larger, which is ensuring clean water for your community? So that has been part of our work since its inception in Burundi, especially in Burundi, Congo, Rwanda, Uganda. That's always been a very important part of our work.
Thanks. It shows how everything is a whole, doesn't it?
it does.
Well, we've gone a little bit over time. Does anybody else have any questions? All right, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. As we've mentioned, next week we're going to be doing a chat about permagardens, and Peter will be our keynote speaker. That's going to be really interesting. It's for something that seems so simple, it's actually amazingly complex and can make just a substantial difference in people's lives. David, did you want to leave any passing thoughts?
Well, just, you know, we're in this difficult time now, and our operations, like everyone else's, has been changing. As you can see, Will is working from home. I'm working from home. Ginny is working from her boat. But we're trying, nonetheless, the one thing that Ginny didn't have in her presentation was soap making.
It's true.
And, you know, we're always telling people to wash their hands with water and soap. And the question is, what if you don't have any water or soap? And we're dealing with that in many places. So we're trying to move upscaling our soap making operations in particular, as well as our normal work. The needs are great, and what we need, we do need money. Obviously, we've cut our budget by about 1/3 already for this year. The main way you can help is by becoming a sustaining member. You know, even small monthly contributions allow us to plan and allow us to make sure that we can keep our wonderful staff on. Don't worry, Will, you're in no danger, at least as far as I know. But we want to be able to continue to extend and expand the work in ways that you've seen. And thank you so much for being part of this.
I want to thank you, Ginny, for your presentation. To me, it was very informative. And I liked the question and answer period because that was also interesting. So thank you very much for letting me join your group. And I learned a lot. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining from Arizona.
Okay.
I want to thank you, Ginny, very, very much. This was just one of the best explanations of the program that I've seen. And I think the work is amazing. And also, I just have to say, I think it's very appropriate that a hydrologist lives on a boat.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. You have a wonderful Friday and enjoy your weekend. And I hope everybody joins us again next week.
Thank you.
All right. Quick question.
Oh.
If there's any questions,
I was going to ask if any drinking water folks want to have a little chat after this, or do we just go on our Friday afternoon?
I was just going to leave before that answer. If anyone has questions that they think of afterwards, if you send them to Will, he'll send them to me, and I'll try to get an answer back to you as best I can. I think I'm done for the day.
Okay.
Yes, I can understand that.
Yeah.
Water. And what was the question before that?
I think Terry was asking if the drinking water people wanted to get together for a continued call on another line.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, through another meeting, Will.
Okay, sure.
I have some gardening to do myself, so I'm going to say goodbye probably until maybe next week.
All right, sounds good. I'd like to go outside too. It looks so nice out, so.
It is, it's very nice.
Yeah, I think I need to finish what I was doing before coming in.
Okay, all right.
Rain's coming.
Rain is coming, that's good.
Before
Okay.
Monday.
You gotta be ready for it whenever it comes, and you never know when it's gonna come. That's the whole point.
Okay, all right, thanks, Jen, and good presentation. Talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.